Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the EUDAIMONIA Connection podcast. And today we're going to be speaking to a friend of ours from the US who's going to be telling us about his life and also going into that random questions about his life and how his life has shaped him to be the man that he is today. So I'd like to welcome to the show, ROB DUNBIN. Rob, how are you? Did I Dubin or Dubin? Did I say it wrong? I did it wrong, didn't I?
No, you had it right. It's Dubin. You're good.
Oh, cool. I'll edit that out then. So how are you? How is it over there? You are so lucky going into spring, summer. Well, we're unfortunately now going into winter, and I hate winter.
Well, we love it here. I'm a big skier, and yesterday was one of the best powder days of the season, so it's all good here.
Where are you?
I'm in a little town in the middle of Colorado, up in the Rocky Mountains, a little place called Salida.
I mean, like this. I've never been there, but the pictures that I see, it just looks so amazing to have that view. You know, like you probably see it every day and don't even think twice.
Well, we think about it. We never take it for granted. We're grateful every time. But yes, we have spectacular scenery right out the window here.
Yeah. So before we get started on your questions, do you want to just tell the audience a little bit about your background, a little about you?
Sure. I was a filmmaker and I loved what I did. I was very lucky that when I was a young person, I knew what I wanted to do, and I went right from high school into a film school, and I made movies all over the world, lots of sports and adventure movies. And then I retired at a very young age. I was 42, and my wife and I, after a kind of an interesting experience, we re-examined our lives, kind of like what many people have done during the pandemic. And we sold our home and bought a sailboat, and we spent the next 17 years sailing around the world. And we lived in Australia for several years, as a matter of fact.
So you are living the EUDAIMONIA Connection, aren't you? You're finding. So how did you go? I mean, like, God, there's a million questions just in that. How did you go from being successful in films to like deciding what was the feeling of not wanting to do it anymore?
Well, I tell people that I was a filmmaker for 20 years and I absolutely loved it for 19 and a half years.
Right.
And when I stopped loving it, I stopped doing it.
Yeah.
And we had a kind of a life or death survival experience in the mountains a couple years before we took off. And we were lost for 5 days up in the Colorado Rockies in one of the worst storm, probably the worst storm of my lifetime. And we were given up for dead, and the sheriff said the search was called off for us and they would recover our frozen bodies the next spring. And when we got out the end of that same day, the first phone call we received was from the President of the United States congratulating us on our survival because our story had gone so viral and millions of people around the country had been watching day by day as hope for us dwindled.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like that's a movie in itself.
It's quite an interesting story. And so for the next few days after we got out, we were kind of the toast of the town. We were on all the television shows, and Oprah called and everybody else. But my wife had suffered severe frostbite from our nights, these endless nights bivouacked in the snow with no tent or anything. And her feet were completely frozen from the arch of the foot forward. And they were coal black and they were hard as a rock. And the third night she was in the hospital, the doctors pulled me aside and told me the next day they were going to have to amputate both of her feet at the arch of the foot. And then they would wait a few days till she recovered from that. And then they were going to have to amputate all of her fingers.
Oh, wow.
And I went home after that and I just collapsed on the floor. I walked in the door of our home and I happened to look down and see a pair of my wife's running shoes there, and I just fell apart. And I spent a sleepless night just in a fetal position on the floor, contemplating what kind of terrible life lay ahead of us. We were such adventurous people, and all that was about to come to an end, and there was nothing I could do about it. But I woke up the next morning feeling incredibly powerful. I had gone from my most powerless, worst feeling of my life. In a matter of hours, I woke up feeling the most powerful I had ever felt. And I raced to the hospital before the doctors could tell my wife. and I told her she was going to have a complete recovery, and we both focused on her having a complete recovery. And when the doctors came in about an hour later, we refused to sign the papers authorizing the surgery.
Oh,
And
so you decided not to do it.
they said, you have to do this to save her life, and we refused to do it. We've done a lot of work with Tony Robbins, and we incorporated some of those things, and we just focused on a complete recovery. And that's kind of the introduction to what I'm all about now, which is also the title of what your podcast is all about. And I think that the number one way to have a interesting life, and that contentment that is the definition of your podcast, is to have a compelling future. And that's what we created in our minds first, is this idea of a very compelling future. We had already had a 10-year plan that we wanted to go sailing, but we put all our energies while she was in the hospital there on focusing on what kind of boat we were going to get and where we were going to go and all of that.
You need to tell us if she recovered.
Well, a year late, it took a year. I won't bore you with all the details, but a year later, we went to Cancun, Mexico to meet Tony Robbins. We'd done work with him before. He actually called her in the hospital because we had a little bit of a personal relationship with him. But a year after the event, we were down in Cancun, Mexico, and she was on the beach with 2 feet and 10 fingers and 9.5 toes,
Wow.
dancing in the sand.
Yeah, I mean, you are the epitome of what podcast is about, because I woke up one day and I was unable to walk. And so it was the same sort of story where I was told I wouldn't walk again. And I said, no, I'm going to walk. And so I did the same thing. I just focused on myself, discovered all these ways, and I walked. And so, it was all about how do you seek fulfillment without having to, you don't need money or materialistic things. It really has to come from inside. But the interesting thing is that every time I meet someone who has these amazing stories, I feel like they've all got this sort of crossroad crisis that they cross over. And so my work is about trying to get people to have the crisis without having a crisis. Don't wait until something happens. Because if it wasn't for that situation for me, I wouldn't have probably changed. Maybe. It could have taken longer. What about you? Do you think that life would have still gone down that same path?
Yes, I do think it would have gone about down the same path, because it was the fact that we survived 5 days. That was before the crisis, so to speak, of her feet.
Yes.
Or at least we didn't have time to think about it in the same way, because it was happening in real time, and we had the fortitude to do what we needed to do out there.
Yeah.
And since that happened, as we sailed around the world, I really made a study of what made people happy in their lives. We were making movies about the sailing industry, so we were very involved with the America's Cup, even way back from when Australia took it away from us the first time. And in the world of the people that compete for the America's Cup, the millionaires and billionaires in that high-end yacht racing, we had found that there were some of these people that were happy and some weren't. And then we sailed around the world, and we were on, Pacific Island beaches in third world countries with barefoot villagers, and some of them were happy and some weren't. And I started this introspection of what made people happy. And so that's now what I speak about, is I have a framework and a formula for teaching happiness. And you're a psychologist, is that correct?
Yeah, psychotherapist, and sort of I do, all that sort of life coaching stuff.
Right. So you obviously know probably the early research in positive psychology. Sonia Lubomirsky identified that she said that 40% of our capacity for happiness was built into our DNA. And when I read that, it totally resonated, because I've known that I was that way from being a young child.
Yeah, myself.
So she may be correct. I know subsequently some other psychologists in the positive psychology field don't necessarily agree with her take on that. But what I have found is that whether I got my 40% through DNA, which probably is true, I can teach it to people who didn't get it in their DNA. I have a framework for happiness that I can teach to other people.
Yeah.
And that's actually what I do now.
Yeah. So before we start the questions, I guess I'm listening to that, and what I identify with that is I find that I found true happiness once I surrendered. Surrendering was a big part for me because when I was in the hospital and I couldn't walk, I was very sort of attached, to this concept, and I was angry and all that. And so I went to see, I saw a coach, and he said, you need to surrender. And I said, I have surrendered. And I was really angry. And he goes, you haven't surrendered. And we kept fighting for a few months. And then when I finally got it, I walked 3 days later. So surrendering to me is really about just being open to what comes. Really removing expectations, removing all those, comparing yourself. And, the way that I sort of do it mentally is I pretend that I'm the only person that's real and everyone else is an avatar. So that way I just focus on me and I don't worry about what other people are doing. They're just part of my game or my movie that I'm watching. So yeah, I could talk to you for hours, but I better start asking you the questions. So are you ready?
I'm very good. It sounds like I'm on Jeopardy or something, but go ahead.
Okay, so the first question that comes up for you is interesting. Is in your perception, how do we differentiate between constructing situations and knowing what's real? That's so perfect for you, isn't it?
That is a good question. So what I believe is that our experience of life is not what happens to us. It's how we think about what happens to us. And so and when I teach people how to be happy human beings, and part of it is one of the things you just mentioned, that you don't care what other people think about you in a sense. So that's one of the frameworks that I teach. But when you have this framework where you have a way of thinking about things, that actually becomes your experience, not the reality of what happened.
Yeah,
so
it's like your perception of the situation.
Exactly. And so I guess that would be my answer to that question is it's not reality. Reality is what your mind tells you just happened, not what an outside camera might have seen happen to you.
Okay. So in your life, growing up as, say, a young boy, teenager, how did you maintain understanding the functionality of society? So how did you get, how were you part of society, community? How did you process that for yourself as a young man?
I am still the 10-year-old boy that I was when I woke up on the very first day of summer vacation and school was out, and I popped out of bed at 8 a.m, and I had the whole summer before me and the whole world before me, and no limits on what I could do. Everything was in front of me, and I could make the whole summer magic.
Yeah, and you're living that now. Don't tease us. Okay?
I still live that way. And so that was how I was when I was 10 years old. And when I ran out of the house to jump on my bike at 8 a.m, my mom would yell out two things. You kids be home by dinner time, which we never were. And the second thing is, don't let anybody get hurt. And I still live my life that same way. I think the goal of my life when I woke up this morning is to make myself happy as long as I don't hurt anybody else along the way to finding my own happiness.
Right, yeah. I mean, it is pretty... I mean, listeners to this podcast will be saying, oh, wow, he's got this ideal life. But they might turn around and say, well, he's, a one-off or whatever, that it's not possible for everyone. So I guess the next question is... sort of ties into that, and it is how do you put value on your life? And I guess you sort of answered that. So how do you, I guess I'm going to add a little later to that, how do you get rid of the dark clouds?
I don't have a lot of dark clouds, but let me answer the question about how do I put value on my life. Because when we set off to go sailing, we kind of went through 3 phases of our sailing life. The first phase I call the how not to die phase. And it's where you're learning everything about the boat, how to navigate safely and keep yourself alive and, not get into a bad storm and get over, put your boat on the reef or sink the boat or whatever. And it's really inwardly focused on yourself. And that was pretty much, maybe the first 6 months or 9 months of the sailing experience. And then we went into this second phase, which is kind of a mutual benefit phase. We went to a lot of third world countries with very poor people. We always carried school supplies for the kids and fish hooks or batteries or tools that I would give to the men and sewing supplies for the women. And we always carried all that stuff and whatever clothes, we could carry, extra clothes. And we always gave all that stuff away. And it opened doors. They invited us into their lives. We helped them and they helped us. And so it added to our sailing experience, but it was kind of a two-way street. And we did that for quite a while. And we were always contributing in the way I just described, but it was always just a Band-Aid. I mean, next year they needed new clothes and they needed more school supplies and whatever else. We weren't really making a lot of difference in the long run.
Yeah, but you were present. You were present and you were attentive to what's going on around you rather than just invading their home and just wanting to have an experience for yourself.
Oh, absolutely. We were very much about the two-way street. But then, every day on the boat, we literally pinched ourselves and said, do you believe we're so lucky we get to live this life? But eventually we entered the third phase of our life, and it was really about contribution. And we sailed in, when we left Australia, actually, we sailed up to, we left from Darwin and we sailed up to Kupang in Indonesia. And a young woman met us on the beach and offered to be our guide around Kupang, as a medium-sized town there. And she wanted to practice her English. And she was so bright and such an incredible person that we were compelled to want to help her. And it turned out her parents made about $200 a month, but she had gotten a scholarship to go to university to become a teacher. And we knew there must be so many other young women like her that hadn't been so lucky as to get a scholarship. And so in the matter of 1 week that we were in Kupang, we decided to do something different, and we met with the headmaster, the president of the university, and we got him to waive all the entrance requirements for any students that we would sponsor. And then we went to the couple of the high schools and met with the headmasters, and we set up a criteria for a scholarship program that was based on academic ability and financial need. And it was mostly directed towards young women because they have fewer opportunities. And we knew that the itinerant sailors like ourselves that were just sailing through every year would want to contribute to it. So we started a scholarship program in honor of this young woman who was so inspirational. And that was 13 years ago now. And we've put 29 kids through 5 years of college.
I'm going to cry. I feel very emotional doing this podcast with you because it's so funny that I'm talking to you this morning, Melbourne time, is that last night I was talking to a friend and I said, I've really given up on the world. I really feel like there's no good people. And then here you are, you're like a little gift from heaven because it's very rare to meet people like you, which I think the world is sort of lacking at the moment. So it's good to be emotional like this, so I like it.
Well, thank you for that.
Well, I think it's important to share the truth, and so that's how people get inspired. That's why, this podcast really, a lot of people didn't get it at first, but now it's slowly making sense to people. This is the third season. It's all about just hearing all these amazing stories from everyday people that just have these amazing lives, and they're not show-offs. That's the whole point. You're just doing it because that's part of your journey, I guess, in life.
Absolutely. And that for me, I retired when I was 42. I'm now in my mid 60s, late 60s, and it's really all about contributing to others. And when you said, I'm a one-off, I don't know if I'm a one-off or not, but I know that I can teach and share what I have learned. And part of it is the people that I've met along my journey. And the sailing is very interesting because, when you cross the ocean from the Panama Canal to Australia, it's a pretty slow process, and you have lots and lots and lots of time to think and examine your life and see what's made a difference. And so part of it, the place I've arrived to is the result of that hours and hours and hours of introspection that made it possible.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's interesting. I'm listening to you and your stories, and I'm going I'm telling myself, well, I'm sort of like a sailor. Like these podcasts, if I didn't, I never would have thought I'd be doing podcasts. And I'm in the same sort of situation. I'm meeting all these people globally just from this. This is my boat. And I think it is, special when you connect with people. I mean, just on a side note, like, do you feel that people are wanting do you think people want to get that experience or the understanding? Or do you think that there is a bit of a disconnection at the moment with a lot of people wanting it done quickly without maybe doing the work?
Well,
you know what I mean by that with the younger generation?
I think I know what you mean. One of the things that I see happening around me now, that little bit of examination or that we went through when what experience of my wife's feet thing, I've seen millions of people as a result of the pandemic examine their lives. I mean, we're going through something in the United States, I think it's probably in Australia too, called the Great Resignation. Millions and millions of people quitting their jobs. I think it was 47 million in 2021, quitting their jobs because they examined their life. And they're saying, I examined my life during the pandemic and I didn't like what I saw. I'm not happy. Yeah. And I really have realized that we bought into a misconception about what happiness is. We think that if we do what we were told, get a good education, go to college, have a good job, get married, have kids, have a reasonable salary, and what we used to call the white picket fence life in America, that happiness happens to you. And that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You have to first decide to be happy, and that actually makes possible all those kinds of successes. Yeah. So during the pandemic, millions of people, they haven't figured out how to get happy yet, but at least they're asking the question, which is the right start.
Yeah. And I guess also people forget, and this could be wrong, but this is how I sort of view it, is that I think people forget that life is about living, and so it requires work. I think that we should stop having this concept where things are going to be given to us. I'm going to be happy because I'm entitled to be happy. I mean, like anything, a relationship, studying, your body, anything requires work. And I think I personally at the moment am really working with a lot of young teenagers who don't want to work. They just want to be famous,
Yeah.
So
See,
it's interesting, isn't it?
I don't like to use the word work. I agree with your concept, but I say it requires effort.
Effort, yeah. Well, yeah.
Because, like right now, I've recently started this business where I'm doing public speaking on these subjects of how to find happiness. And, my wife and I will finish dinner and we'll watch some TV, and then I'll come back into my office and start doing something on the computer. But it's not work.
Yes,
It's fulfilling me. It's filling up the cup.
Yeah,
so it's effort, right, for sure. And that's what it takes is the effort.
If you live your purpose, you're not really working anyway.
Exactly. And that's what I've always done. When I made movies, I loved like I said, did it for 20 years and I loved it for 19 and a half.
Yeah.
And it was never a job.
Yeah. I'm being serious when I say that the questions that are being allocated to you are not being chosen by me. I really am honest. The next question is, do people have a right to be happy or should they have to earn it?
Well, clearly, I think so. I teach, as I said, I teach a course in happiness, and I have a 30-page workbook that I use for my workshop. And on the cover of it, it has a quote that, again, your happiness podcast is a Greek word, and it has a quote from Aristotle. This is the lead quote in my program from Aristotle, a Greek philosopher. Happiness is the meaning and purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence.
Mm. So do you think that, do you think that someone cannot be happy? Or do you think everyone innately has happiness? Do you know
I think there's millions of people that are not happy.
Yeah, I should be talking about my father this way, but he always looks at the half glass empty concept of life, and it's like he purposefully doesn't want to be happy, and that makes me sort of not sad. It makes me want more for him, but I know that he's got to do it himself. So you think that some people are just, how you were talking about that 40% earlier. Do you think that some people don't have that?
Absolutely. I think most people don't get it through their DNA.
Yeah.
But again, I'll refer to my happiness course that I teach. I think on page 1 or 2, I say the first key to happiness is to give yourself permission to be happy, to convince people that you have a right to be happy, because a lot of people don't think that.
Yeah.
I mean, I told the story that I'm still that 10-year-old boy, that's my goal every day. I wake up, what am I going to do to make it fun and happy today? But a lot of people don't realize life is supposed to be about being happy.
Yeah, and happiness isn't necessarily as well about being good. Do you know what I mean? Like, so sometimes, say for example, when I couldn't walk, I learned how to be happy without the ability to walk. So sometimes life is about acceptance, right? Acceptance means that you can be happy in really dark times. Like I look at things like I watched a documentary recently about the Jewish, the Auschwitz and the Nazis and all that. And there was a woman in there, and she said that every day, like she's only a little girl at the time, but every day she would wake up and she would do ballet. She would dance, and she would look around, but she would not connect with what she saw. She just connected with being happy, and she survived. And that really resonates with me in regards to happiness can be even when it's a dark time.
Absolutely. Christopher Reeve was actually a friend of mine, and I don't know if Superman,
Yeah.
and then he had that terrible horse riding accident and was paralyzed from the neck down, and he was happy. Actually, Robin Williams was his best friend, and just during the very first week when Chris was just starting to figure all this out of what his life was going to be, Robin Williams walked in and to visit him. They were best friends, so this was like the 3rd or 4th day after the accident. Robin Williams went into the hospital, borrowed a white coat from a doctor and a stethoscope, and he walked in, and instead of the tears pouring out like all of us would be inclined to do, Robin Williams walked in and started going through one of his shticks and, using the stethoscope and putting it on Chris's toes or his nose or whatever, and they started laughing, and Chris said that was the moment. Excuse me, I get choked up. That was the moment that he realized life could be happy again.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, and I guess the next question is, I probably know the answer to this because of the way you've spoken throughout this, but what do you feel is something that is still terrifying to you? I know you're pretty adventurous and pretty positive, but come on, you can't be Superman. Like, is there anything that you still feel a little bit uncomfortable about?
Well, I hate to say this publicly, but I'm afraid to sing karaoke in public.
Come on, this is your chance.
I told people, somebody posted something on the internet the other day that said 1 point for all the things you haven't done in life. And I said I'd never been in a bar that had enough alcohol to get me to sing karaoke.
Yeah.
But the real answer to your question, and I had this same thing. I started taking yoga classes about 8 years ago, and the very first class, the teacher asked, there were like 6 of us, it was introduction to yoga or something, and she said, had 3 questions for each of us. What do you think yoga is? Or what's your understanding of what yoga is? What do you expect to get out of this? And what are you afraid of? And she came to me and I said, I don't mean to sound arrogant, but I just don't live any of my life from a point of fear. I just don't approach anything from a point of fear. And so I mean, yeah, if it came to it, I would happily sing karaoke, but
I need to get you on to the people that changed my life a lot, and that is there's a sort of alliance or a group out there in America of these 3 very young men, and they've started a movement called the Yes Theory. I don't know if you've heard of them. And so their motto is every morning you wake up and you ask yourself, what discomfort do I need to seek today? And so
that's what I do. If I realize there's something I'm fearful of, I immediately go and do it. And I just don't approach my life from a point of fear. And actually, when we sailed around the world for 17 years and I started speaking to people about that, whether it was in big audiences or just at a dinner party somewhere, the first response from 98% of the people is, I would love to do that, but I would be afraid. Or
Yeah.
they say, ask about what about pirates, or what's the worst storm you encounter.
They always get that negative place, don't
I
they?
mean, I'm always hoping the first question will be, "What's the prettiest sunset you had?" or "Where's the best, place you've been?" But it's generally about fear. But I
It's
have a
human nature.
strategy. I have a strategy about how to overcome fear that I teach as part of my happiness course. Because in my happiness course, the biggest part of it is creating your dreams, figuring out what your dreams are, and then for most of us, there's some fear that lies between us and our dream because
Yeah.
it takes us out of our comfort zone. So I mean, you can't sail around the world or sail across the ocean without dealing with fear. I mean, encountering a storm at sea your first time is a fearful experience without a
Sure.
doubt. So you have to have a way of.
But that's what the fear, fear is designed to be utilized in those situations, but it's not designed to be utilized before you even leave.
Exactly.
Do you know
But
what
I
I
have
mean?
a process that I can take people through. It's a multi-step process, but it's how to deal with fear, and it works. People try it, and they can deal with their fears.
Yeah. Okay, last question. So in regards to, again, this is a really unusual question. How do you feel tribalism has been a part of your life? How have tribalism, meaning it could be the masculine man tribe, it could be the tribe of marriage, could be the tribe of sailor, it could be the tribe of filmmaker. You've sort of been in these sort of subgroups. How has that, it sounds to me that there's a lot of your life that's been based around tribes or groups, and then there's also this individual part of you. So how has group settings helped you?
Well, I definitely get energy from people, from being around people, from sharing ideas with people. My wife is much more of an introvert than I am, although most of the time she's an extrovert too, but she definitely likes her quiet time and she needs quiet time to recharge. And I'm always leading the band, and I owned multiple businesses, or being a film director on set with 50 people, they're all looking to you. And in the sailing community, I was a leader of the community. I would be putting together the events or the organizational things. So I guess I've always liked to commit to a tribe. In the professional world, in the film industry, I was president of the film industry in Colorado because I feel a commitment to the tribe, I guess. So I've always stepped up to that role. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know if
can
that's what.
feel that. I can feel it. This, I can feel it. I also think America is more designed for that. I mean, like you lived in Australia. You know how Australia doesn't necessarily go for the rah rah. Australia's sort of like very, don't get too smart, don't get too loud, sort of thing.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I've never liked the tall poppy
oh,
syndrome concept.
that's
It's really.
why. Yeah, that's why I love America. And like every time I go there, I just love it. Oh, my lights just went off. Hold on. That's weird. Um, so thank you so much. I mean, this has been probably, I mean, I shouldn't say this out loud, but this has been one of the best interviews I've done. And I've done like hundreds of them. So it's really, really nice um, because I only do 10 of these probably every half year. I only do a very limited amount. And, it's nice because sometimes you just don't know who you're going to speak to, and you're just a breath of fresh air. So thank you for everything that you've said. And I'm going to share everything with everyone in regards to your course and your information. So if they want to reach out, they can reach out. So Rob, thank you for spending time with us and talking to us.
You are most welcome. Would you do me a big favor
Sure.
and send me the quotes that you just said about what a good interview it was, and breath of fresh air, whatever you said on your recording? Would you just send me that little bit?
Okay, I will.
I would love to put that. That's really nice of you to say that, and I really enjoy doing podcasts because in this point in my life, it's really all about giving back to others, and I'm trying to do as much of that as I can.
Yeah, thank you. So you've been listening to the EUDAIMONIA Connection podcast, and again, like I said, this has really inspired me. I feel like I need to go and have a cry now. But please, please, please hit like and subscribe and listen to all the interviews. We've got a variety of people, from a young boy who's become an international best-selling author to a woman who has traveled the world and actually helped homeless people. We've had people that have been really inspirational and really famous in regards to their tragedy in their life and they've changed. So again, anything that can help you to find happiness and seek fulfillment is our mission here. So till next time, everyone, namaste, have a great day. Bye.